everybody I talk to about it is like, do not show the AT-AT for the first thing that we ever show, because we don't want to give the impression that we're, you know, some just climbing around Lara Croft game, because that's not what we are. This is a moment in our game, but most of what you're doing is going around and kicking ass with a lightsaber.
Right. And
I worry when I hear that there's, you know, like basically the first thing that anybody's going to see is not going to represent 99% of our game.
There is a moment in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order where, about 4 hours in, we swim through a lake, scale an AT-AT, take it over from the inside, come face to face with Saw Gerrera, and blast at a stormtrooper battalion on a battlefield in Kashyyyk. The whole section feels like it was pulled from another game. It is simultaneously one of the best moments in Fallen Order, and one of the worst. You spend an achingly long time climbing up around it like you're in Tomb Raider, taking over the AT-AT, you're on rails. It doesn't matter what you do, the game will progress whether your aim is solid or not. I sat in the AT-AT for upwards of 3 minutes, just letting the stormtroopers blast away at me, and there was no fail state. You can't even march the big bugger forwards unless you jam the R2 button. The shoot man gun button is what makes you move forwards. But, it's an AT-AT, and we're driving it into Empire blockades and blasting the absolute crap out of stormtroopers, and it's Star Wars, man, it's fucking Star Wars, and the music is swelling, and you've got a lightsaber, and the brief moment of combat you get is rigorous and weighty, and oh man, I've got this warm, burbling feeling in my stomach. Yeah, get 'em! Pew pew pew! Fallen Order puts you to and fro between childish giddiness with the Star Wars moments, and frustration at the weird design choices which those moments often carry. And I remember being kinda conflicted about the game when I first beat it. I felt satisfied and cozy, but some part of my brain itched, telling me that if it didn't have Star Wars in the title, I might have been more harsh on it. So, with the news of a new Knights of the Old Republic game on the way, and Fallen Order 2 being rumoured for a 2022 release date, I decided to revisit a game I really definitely sort of enjoyed the first time through, to analyse it through a more critical lens. So does it live up to my memory? Let's find out. This is a critique of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have any questions, comments, concerns.
One of my favourite phrases ever is, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. I mean it. I don't say it enough. The way the plosives just smack together, it really reinforces the soft blow it gives as an insult, like punching someone through a pillow. It's so playful. Playfully putting lipstick on a pig. Seriously, try saying it while I do my costume change. Did you say it out loud? Really? Why? Why are you letting a stranger on the internet tell you what to do? Stupid. But yes, the phrase lipstick on a pig means that you can make superficial or cosmetic changes to a product in a futile effort to disguise its fundamental failings. 2016 Suicide Squad had lipstick in the form of bombastic title cards and catchy songs, but it was still a pig, and a diseased one at that. Marvel's Avengers had lipstick in the form of the superhero branding, but that game's still a pig that, like, really stinks. And is still a bad game, by the way, despite what she'll say. But what if a pig appeared with really good lipstick? I mean, like the sort of lipstick that's a tiny modern art piece on your face, with colours that you can taste, and music that makes your heart swell, and a world that you can get lost in, and gameplay that scratches an itch that you didn't even realise you had.
What's up, Hans family? In honor of the new Star Wars movie, thought I'd do a Star Wars tutorial, and this is going to be Darth Sidious.
The analogy's getting away from us, but EA's, Respawn's, Star Wars, Jedi, Fallen Order, presented by Lucasfilm, is a pig. Make no mistake. At some points, it's a pig which shits on your carpet, but it's got some very good lipstick. And I'm not just talking about the Star Wars of it all, either.
Today's look is this awesome Twi'lek from Star Wars.
This is the Star Wars game that I wanted since forever. I get that some of you will have fond memories of Force Unleashed, and the Force Unleashed 1 and 2 were great, but the lightsaber game I have fond memories of is actually Revenge of the Sith. For a licensed game, it let me live out my Jedi power fantasy, and my sister and I would lose hours in the multiplayer duels. So when I saw Fallen Order's E3 demo, I thought, hell yeah, sure. If the developer behind Titanfall and Apex Legends was getting a crack at a single-player Star Wars action game, I was all for it. And they're borrowing from the Soulslike formula to boot. Well, I can't get enough of a decent Soulslike, but even though I was interested in the game, I couldn't help but feel like Respawn were trying to please the crowd, rather than carving their own path. They're rearing a pig and sloppily slapping some second-hand lipstick on it. But I know I'm not alone in saying that Jedi Fallen Order was an engaging and pleasant surprise when I finally sat down with it. It's a solid adventure with a fun story, addictive combat, and any of its flaws, of which there are a fair few, often get batted aside when you unwrap some more of the glossy Star Wars packaging.
Hello, zombies.
So sit back, relax, grab your favourite $60 eyeshadow and strap in Montes, because we're going to see just how lush this lipstick really is, and see if Fallen Orders is enough to transform this pig. Oh, and spoilers ahead. The algorithm is going to recommend this to so many people who don't like Star Wars or video games. Fallen Order's opening is clumsy. The story beats are all here, and the setup is effective in establishing our main character and our villain, but the game feel is difficult to quantify. I mean, physically difficult as well, because it's very mosaic in its design. Jedi Fallen Order throws a lot at a player over the course of its game. It wears a lot of subgenres and mechanical influences on its sleeve, and despite being on Bracca for about 45 minutes, we barely scratch the surface of what makes the game interesting. Instead, it focuses a lot of attention on Uncharted-esque platforming and a lengthy combat tutorial. That's the pig of it. But it's caked and contoured with a fabulous foundation, its enthralling tone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's jump right back to the beginning.
Listen, I don't want to upset your rhythm, Cal, but the boss wants a word.
It's 5 years after Order 66 was given and the Jedi were massacred by Palpatine and the Clone Army. Cal Kestis, great name, is hiding out on Bracca, a junker planet charged with scrapping trash and salvaging equipment from the Clone Wars. Before we even hear him, a droning, bassy tone of Huttese brings in the dinge and dirge of Bracca. It's always been something I wanted more of from Star Wars, more depth from the culture. Sure, there are temples and sacred texts and the like, but if tomorrow someone started up their own musical genre, Star Wars rock or something, like how we get Viking metal, damn right I'd be buying that album. The diegetic way it blares from Cal's headphones as well highlights two things about his character. One, that he's a loner, he's purposefully sought refuge right under the Empire's nose, doing a job which doesn't require much in the form of communication, just hard, manual labour where he can shut himself off from the world. And two, that he's not in the best state of mind. He's racked with guilt and depression, even 5 years on from Order 66. If the style of song he's listening to doesn't give that away, just look at the lyrics when translated.
The black lightning of the eternal sky. Usrin said and was relieved. There are more dawns than dawn.
Talk about doomer lyrics. It's obvious that Cal, deep down, expects that one day the Empire will come for him. That's an inevitability. That there's nowhere he can truly hide, and he's just biding his time. He's a grim character, all things considered, running from the past rather than facing it head on, and because of this guilt, he's lost his connection with the Force. The first 10 minutes of the game focuses on Cal and his grisly old pal Prof climbing on precarious ships and through back alley garbage, and the entire purpose of this, at least narratively, is to showcase how far down on the food chain Cal and Prof are. To the Empire, their lives are inconsequential. They salvage ships, they are their work, nothing more, and the level design is what portrays this. This isn't a safe job for anyone. Cal nearly plummets to his death at least a dozen times while he's trying to get to the latest piece of junk. But the first 10 minutes also tutorializes one mechanic and one mechanic only, the platforming. The developers presented Fallen Order as Jedi Souls during the press briefings, but the game's first impression on the player is Uncharted but Star Wars. It's a good while until you get to swing a lightsaber, and whilst I'm leaving a direct look at the platforming until later, it's worth comment here because Fallen Order can't seem to make its mind up as to when the game officially begins. Seriously, when does the game really start? Is it here? Or is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Seriously, Fallen Order establishes the status quo 5 times in its opening 2 hours. Not resets the status quo, but changes the status quo. Establishes the status quo. See, by minute, say, 30 of your typical game, your main cast will generally be introduced and the gameplay and game feel which will carry your experience will be set up. Marvel Spider-Man, it's an open world game where you swing about and punch bad guys. In Bloodborne, you maneuver intersectional level design and kill hard-as-hell monsters. In Uncharted, you shoot goons, follow on-rails platforming, and solve light puzzles. By minute 30 of Fallen Order, we've set up about 20% of our game feel. Jedi Fallen Order is a lot of things, arguably too many things. It's robust combat, it's Metroidvania world design, it's intersectional level design, it uses a Dark Souls checkpoint system, it's platforming, it's cinematic QTE-filled sequences, it's puzzles, and Braca only introduces 2 of them, platforming and combat. It ultimately makes the game's opening 2 hours feel like it doesn't know what it wants to be. The opening would be much stronger if the platforming wasn't so long before we get to Prof, or it was littered with droids. Cal is already treading off the beaten path, and having some dumb security droids that we could bash with a metal pole or something would mean that there's a sense of variety to the game's opening moments, rather than an achingly long 20 minutes of watching Cal clamber along a wall. There's a level design philosophy called chromostereopsis, an overly technical name for how a level designer uses colour to organically guide a player to a point of interest or advancement. It dates right back to 2D games, but we can see it all too clearly in Naughty Dog's level design. And yes, it's important to talk about Naughty Dog here, because Fallen Order's opening just screams Uncharted, a space adventure. If you were being base about it, you could describe Naughty Dog's modern design in 3 words. Follow the yellow. Taking the famous train sequence from Uncharted 2, many of the climbable ridges, or a painted yellow colour, cracked and peeling so that they still blend into the environment, but the player is trained to look out for shades like these through their entire journey. Braca has a lot of follow the yellow moments, but the chromostereopsis drops away the second we leave the planet. Just look at this climbing section in the game's opening moments compared to, say, later on Kashyyyk. Braca trains a player to look for coloured nooks and crannies in the rest of the game, but there's nothing of that sort elsewhere. We'll look at this in more depth when we explore platforming, but it's an example of how muddled the game's opening is where gameplay is concerned. However, here, at the beginning of the game, there's a clear lack of confidence in what the level design is trying to do. You'll hear me comment on this a few times in this critique. I don't know which developer needed more reassurance in their work during the creation of Fallen Order, but damn, someone give them a hug for pity's sake. Braca's platforming isn't massively complex, but Cal constantly talks to himself while we maneuver the junkyard as well.
Get to the front, stop the train.
It's so unnecessary. The coloured platforms and textured walls for climbing and hopping are intrinsically placed and focused to the player's eyeline, but Cal's whole time on Braca is coloured by his constant remarks and orders to himself, like the game is terrified the player won't know what to do. Fallen Order is a tough game. It has not been created for first-time players, even on the easiest difficulty. The combat, in particular, requires careful thought. This is not a game that a player will struggle to find their way around, and it's not a game which requires the amount of hand-holding we get in its opening section. On the flip side, the player is eased into the Star Wars of it all by gorgeous shots like this when scaling the junkyard, presenting the Empire as larger than life and Cal as small and insignificant. A midgie on the arse of the Empire. It's hard to be frustrated at the game's slow platforming when it's overcast by images like this, and the tiny details of overhearing Junker conversations or seeing trashed separatist droids lying in a pile really captures the magic of living in a Star Wars world that a game hasn't given us since Force Unleashed. Climbing to the top of the Junker, it turns out that the scrap Cal and Prof need to salvage is an old Jedi fighter. Prof can't contain his excitement, old nostalgic prawn that he is. Oh, he's such a lovely guy. The sort of colleague that you look up to on a tough day. The sort of guy who subscribed to your YouTube channel. It's lovely that before we even see a lightsaber, the idea of the Jedi being some cosmic tragedy is presented to us through Prof's eyes. Even though he and his race were detached from the events of Order 66, the ripples of the Emperor's plan have rippled out across the galaxy. We feel connected to Prof, just like Cal does. He's the first of 3 mentors that we'll meet in the game, and he's a grisly old sod whose heart is as big as his massive hands. Just look at these things. Despite the flaws of the Republic, this is the sort of guy the Jedi Knights would have once fought for. So bringing him in as an awe-inspired outsider to the magic of the Force makes us feel warm and safe with him. It's an effective piece of characterization, despite being so short-lived. There won't be any movies or comics starring Prof, the guy won't be getting any action figures. Oh damn, Disney, you really gotta be making that money, huh? But my point is that when the rig buckles underneath us, the player and Cal are both tied together in our desperate attempt to help Prof.
What was that back there? Was that you? Well, that was the Force, wasn't it?
Just forget what you saw, okay? Please trust me.
I've seen the stories. I've heard it. Bounties out on people like you.
I know.
There's a resigned sadness to Cal's decision to escape from Bracca. Despite how miserable it seems to be here, he's eked out a life for himself. And whilst he doesn't seem to be happy surrounded by all of this tech and scrap, it's a comfortable, dark hole for him to exist in, cut off from the Force. And by the time the Inquisitors show up, the game has effectively presented him as not satisfied, but content with being here. He wants nothing to do with the Force, and it's a fresh examination of how the Force even works. The whole concept of cutting yourself off is absolutely fascinating, and I appreciate that Cal's characterization introduces a new dynamic to how the Force even works. Even though he's isolated from the Force, the reawakening of his powers and upcoming threat in the form of the Inquisitors means that the Force reaches out to him. It returns one of his abilities to him, and it gives him a vision from his past. As for the presentation of this, Cal's vision sneaks up on the player as much as it does to him. We follow Prof's hulking shadow through a crowded train. Reaching a locked door, we mash the action button a couple of times, and realizing that perhaps we need to go somewhere else, we spin ourselves around to see that the train has evolved into a space station. It's a tiny detail, but Fallen Order is riddled with these illusory moments which strengthen the player's immersion. Sure, you've spent 15 minutes climbing up a wall, but you can't help but breathe in the Star Wars aesthetic.
No common anarchist, but a devotee of the treasonous Jedi Order. Failure to turn over this traitor will result in a charge of sedition.
The introduction of the sisters is so strong in setting up our villains. The Inquisitors are a group of ex-Jedi. They all surrendered to the Empire during the Jedi Purge and fell to the dark side of the Force. Trained by Darth Vader himself, the Inquisitors are Sith in all but name. We've seen a few of the Inquisitors in other mediums, like the Fifth Brother or the Grand Inquisitor in Rebels, but the introduction of the Ninth and Second Sister in Fallen Order tops them for me. The pathetic fallacy of the falling rain, the everyday workers packed into a train and then being ushered off by stormtroopers. Sometimes Nazi imagery is too on the nose, but in the case of the Empire, it's best to double down or go home. The Second Sister's introduction doubles down. Prof immediately wins us over for good by stepping forwards and trying to rouse his fellow workers, buying Cal some time. Speaking truth to power when he highlights that the workers just started getting worked when the Empire appeared. One of the most impactful things about Fallen Order is how we see the far-reaching touch of the Empire in the galaxy. Their barbaric destruction of historical temples, the industrialization of the Zepho homeworld, and yes, the authoritarian way that they run something as arbitrary as a junkyard. And right after Prof, just some random guy, stands up to the second sister, she kills him. So effortlessly too, no swinging of her lightsaber, she just pushes the button and shoots the beam like a gun. There's no hint of a Jedi past in that action. It's cold, simple, mechanical. She's more sadistic than the Empire goons we commonly see in these stories. The Inquisitors have all snapped, and the second sister's presentation really makes it feel like she enjoys the cruelty her position affords. And it's enough to make Cal break his cover. The lightsaber comes out and he makes a run for it, and finally, after half an hour of climbing and cutscenes, we get to engage with the game's oh so thoughtful combat system. And the entire train sequence is a microcosm of where Fallen Order succeeds and where it fails. It's an effective tutorial, don't get me wrong, a straight run to the front of a train and well-placed enemies to teach us about the parry system, but it's intercut with even more platforming again, like the game is scared of just giving us a lengthy piece of combat in case we get too frustrated or bored. There's no XP gauge at the top of the screen like in the rest of the game, meaning the player isn't taught about leveling up your character. There are no meditation points at all, so the checkpoint system is essentially non-existent. Tense moments like going toe-to-toe with armed stormtroopers are mingled with climbing along the side of the train. But you're also battling stormtroopers in the middle of a storm on a moving train which is exploding all around you. It's bombastic, the music is swelling at all the right moments, you're dodging the blasts of a TIE fighter and being reminded of Uncharted 2's equally invigorating opening, and I'm having so much fun doing it. But an effective opening in tutorializing the systems, this is not. And as a result, I couldn't be more conflicted about the game's opening.
Going somewhere? I recognize that stance. Perhaps you've had some training after all.
Your first boss of the game is the second sister. Typically of a game as challenging as this, she's one of those you can't beat her fights. But kudos to Respawn, it's not a stereotypical you're meant to die boss either. With how difficult she is on your first time through, you'd be forgiven for thinking that that was the case. It's a tense battle, you're stuck in a claustrophobic space, your force powers aren't working on her so you need to stick to parrying. She's fast, faster by far than anything you've fought up until this point, and you can't even heal yet. But you have to take off about 1/10 of her health bar to progress. She effectively gates off the rest of the game's more challenging content. If you haven't picked up the basic skill set of parrying and dodging yet, you're going to need to work at them if you want to engage with what Fallen Order has to offer. Forcing the player to fight the second sister means that we feel Cal's weakness at the beginning and outlines a path for us to grow. Luckily, a very particular cavalry arrives in the form of the Mantis, and Cal makes his escape from Braca. Let's meet the team.
My name is Seer Junda, and this is my captain, Grease Dritus.
How you doing? Yeah, the Mantis is my ship, but you better pay attention to this lady here.
I often refer to a group of main characters in a show or movie as the team in an almost cynical way, but I think it's important we define what a team is in the context of an adventure story. A team here is essentially a group of people who spend a large amount of time on screen together, and all contribute a small part to a greater whole. Not every cast of characters forms a team. For example, Game of Thrones doesn't have a team of characters. In fact, by the end of that show, they didn't even have characters anymore, but the original trilogy has a team. Star Wars Rebels has a team. Firefly has a team. And Jedi Fallen Order has a team which reminds me of these three and many, many more. We've got the hero, the mentor, the grizzled captain, the mascot, and the indigenous witch with a different outlook on life to Cal. Now, the fact that these characters, at least on a surface level, fall into comfy archetypes doesn't undermine how interesting they are as members of Cal's team. I'd go so far as to say that in this case, it would be unfair to refer to the depth of writing which goes into each of their individual stories and how they contribute to the greater adventure as lipstick. When you're exploring the galaxy with them, it feels like so much more. Cal is immediately distrusting of Cere and Grease. He's truly shaken up by the sudden appearance of the Empire, but when Cere mentions the Jedi Order, there's a new hope, which flashes in his eyes. Cere isn't exactly the warm, calming mentor that, say, Obi-Wan was in Luke Skywalker's journey. She's just as damaged as Cal is. It's obvious that she's not staking much on our young Padawan, and she's aware that by recruiting us to the cause, she's scraping the bottom of the barrel. The same can be said for Grease, who's typically mocking and surly of us when we arrive. He's a self-serving coward at first glance, who's been hired by Cere to help chart her on her quest. There's clearly a tension aboard the ship. The way Grease quietly respects Cere is almost in awe of her focus and apparent collectedness. There's a contrast between Cere's self-control and Grease's lack of it in the form of his gambling addiction. His ship, the Mantis, is cozy, to say the least. There are couches and a coffee table and a little room for Cal to work on his lightsaber. There's even a meditation spot shoved into the corner of what is essentially a broom closet, and whilst it's hardly the Normandy or the Millennium Falcon, it's got quite a bit of character to it, especially with the huge sail which sticks out from its top like a boat. The side quest to collect some seeds for Grease is particularly nice, and it gives the player further reason to explore when we're out in the field. My only issue is I wish there was more in the form of customization. Finding a paint job for the Mantis is cute and all, but it would really give the player a sense of ownership over the team's quarters if we got to do something as trite as change the colours of the couches as well. We don't have much time to think about it though, because we've finally arrived to the true beginning of the game. Maybe. Sort of. Bogano is, with all due respect, another tutorial twirled around a Star Wars curling iron to make it seem like it's more. It's a vast plain of greenery with multiple layers filled with gaps which look a lot smaller than they actually are. The enemies are so grubby and weak looking in their designs that it's almost insulting the first time they kill you. But the entire purpose here is to train the player in the game's second category of enemies: animals. You can parry these critters, sure, but as a general rule of thumb, the best course of action is to sidestep them and whap them on the butt with your lightsaber. You find your first meditation point here and unlock your first skill, drawing on the XP gauge which was inexplicably missing up until now. You're left to your own devices with one goal: get to the temple on the far side of the map. So much of your basic gameplay is taught to the player here, basic gameplay which, I argue, should have been included in Bracca's introductory sequence. The open desire to explore that the game goes to laborious lengths to activate in the player only really appears when we get to Bogano. But the game keeps stopping the player to tutorialize the system to us, and nowhere is this clearer than with BD1.
Hey, BD1. I'm Cal.
Oh, BD1, you are so friggin' cute. I just want to smoosh your metal cheeks. Who's a good boy? You are. Yes, BD1 is as cynically cute as you would expect from a game by EA, but he isn't just a cynical mascot. Cal can speak to him because of his time as a scrapper. He spent 5 years around droids, so of course he understands them. BD can heal us. He can scan interesting details in the world to expand on the world building. He can scan fallen enemies to provide tips and tricks if we go up against them again. For example, with Ogdo Bogdo, BD1 can point out that the tongues on these giant toads are their weak points, so we know to focus on that the next time. There's a lot that the game gets right with BD1, and when we eventually lose him in the story, it's like we lose a part of ourselves. The connection between player and droid is as strong here as it possibly could be. Hell, it even makes Cal's inane ramblings while platforming much less irritating because at least now he's pointing out to BD1 what he's going to do next. And this masterful control over our emotional connection with the droid is the main reason why the game's most powerful scene later is so powerful. The lipstick is a gorgeous shade here, but we will get there. For now, we need to talk about why BD1 is mechanically slightly frustrating.
Healing stim. You're full of surprises.
My frustrations and how slow Fallen Order is at tutorializing comes to a head with this scene. Nothing new is revealed here other than how our healing mechanic works. We don't need this cutscene to happen, or better yet, I would argue that it would be a perfect place to introduce BD1 for the first time if Respawn were going to keep it. Add our little droid here, with the first thing he does chucking us a stim like the legend that he is. We are easily 90 minutes into the game. We are on our second planet, and it's only now that we learn how to heal. So does the game truly begin here? Because up until now, we were missing numerous core components of our gameplay, both healing and BD1's ability to scan the area. Bogano unfortunately continues this muddled mess of pacing, and true, I didn't notice it so much my first time through, and many of you won't either, but that was most likely because I was so astonished by the lipstick in the Star Wars isms. And on a second playthrough, this pig's opening feels weirdly stretched. We continue to be achingly taught to, like an English teacher reluctantly covering Romeo and Juliet. We get it, Mr. Asmussen. You think Romeo and Juliet is really complex and we're not going to get it, but it's not. It's just not. It's full of techniques we've seen before in more challenging games. You don't need to eke out your tutorial like this. Speaking of tutorials, our first boss is bizarre. You can stumble onto Ogdo Bogdo if you trip down a hole, and considering this is our first, official boss fight, where you have to see it to the end, unlike our initial confrontation with the second sister, it's such a clunky decision to make it, well, optional. You can leave Bogano without a boss fight if you miss him. We've already fought ever so slightly smaller versions of this creature while exploring the level too, so it's not got anything resembling a wow factor when we enter its lair, which is particularly disappointing because Respawn went to the effort to design a massive space dragon which is just sitting on a ridge in the distance. That thing looks like a boss, not Mr. Toad over here. Why did we get to fight that? Sure, it's difficult and it deals a good chunk of damage, but Bogano feels like a planet which should give us a real boss fight to officially complete our tutorial. Oh, and the game crashed just as I killed it. Making it to the temple, we get a cute little moment where Cal challenges BD to a race to the top. When we enter, the vast, ancient chamber just screams boss fight, and any self-respecting player is likely to arch an eyebrow and think, yup, guess we're coming back here at the end. Master Eno Cordova gives us our quest. Seek out the 3 tombs of the 3 Cepho sages. Completing these 3 challenges will unlock a holocron, containing the names of all of the Force-sensitive children still remaining across the galaxy. The plan is simple: follow Cordova's clues, get the holocron, resurrect the Jedi Order. And it's enough to give Cal a good kick up the arse and embrace the call to adventure. It's not unique by any stretch of the imagination, and that's very much my point here. Complete a few temples to get a MacGuffin is something we've seen in video games since before Zelda. It's worthy of criticism that the game's most basic plot is copy-pasta from games which came before it. But hot damn, there is a reason we are likely to forgive it. And that reason is contextual and glossy, like so much of the game is. We know that Cal isn't going to reform the Jedi Order. There was no mention of it in the original trilogy, and we know, as Star Wars fans, that there's not a chance in hell that Respawn have been given permission to retcon the Skywalker saga. Disney wouldn't do that, right? So naturally, we are curious to know how this all ends. It's enough motivation to be invested in the story, even if you don't care about Cal and the team's quest. Seers reveal that she was once a Jedi and that she's holding on to an old holocron is enough of a reason to make us care in a meta sense though. An audience is automatically engineered to be interested in the Jedi. Even after so many movies, comics, books and games, we want to learn more about their mystery. Cal reluctantly leans into the power of the Force, allowing it to connect to him, and we see Obi-Wan's message to his people.
This is Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. I regret to report that both our Jedi Order and the Republic have fallen.
I got chills. I don't care, I did. My first time through, I got chills. Almost enough chills to make me forgive the 2-hour-long tutorial and its 5 resets of the status quo. Almost. Fallen Order will take you to 8 planets. Braca, Bogano, Zepho, Ordo Iris, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, Ilum, and Nur. 4 of these planets, Braca, Ordo Iris, Ilum, and Nur, are streamlined in their design. One path with a couple of branching dead ends or looping back in on itself, with shiny goodies around every corner. These are generally one and done planets. You go here for story reasons, not as part of your galaxy-wide exploration. Bogno, Zepho, Kashyyyk, and Dathomir all have a very different philosophy behind their level design. They're sprawling, interconnected worlds, with an emphasis on verticality to find shortcuts back to where you came from. Elevators, walls to clamber up, you get the idea. And when you conquer one of these planets your first time through, you're encouraged to go out of the beaten path when trekking back to the Mantis so that you can unlock doors and paths to help you get around. Because BD1's map is that standard, flickering, holographic tech that we know so well from Star Wars, it's not particularly easy to rely on. The paths are accurately laid out, sure, but often it's difficult to actually see the path, because each of the map's layers blend into one another. Now, whether you think this is purposeful or not, or if this level of immersion is annoying or not, the outcome is still the same. The player needs to rely on their intuition and familiarity to navigate Fallen Order's levels rather than just the map itself. Arriving on the Zepho homeworld, Cal and co quickly realise that the Empire have beaten them to it. Stormtroopers are currently in the middle of Project Augur, an excavation of Zepho's history and its culture. Zepho is like exploring a labyrinthine excavation site. As a level, it takes you into some underground ice caves, up into the mountains, through a small town which had been evacuated by the Empire, and later we get to explore a crashed Star Destroyer from the Clone Wars. It's full of variety, which is still consistent with the environment, and if there's one thing Fallen Order gets right, it's how it makes a single planet feel like 2 or 3 levels rather than just one. Stepping onto Zepho is also where the game officially begins, for real this time. Cal is left to his own devices, and for this whole time on Zepho, it's the Jedi and droid show, just the way we like it. However, because Fallen Order has more howevers than a Shakespeare play on crack, the emphasis on platforming really lets down the moment-to-moment gameplay. Fallen Order seems to be terrified of just letting you jog along for a lengthy period of time, fighting bad guys and leaning into the combat system. Your journey is constantly broken up by climbing and platforming sections. For example, just before reaching the town on your way to the temple, you cross some wind turbines and need to use slow to halt them so we can make some jumps. This then leads into a bit of combat before a lengthy slip and slide. The game constantly seems like it's trying to justify its force abilities by making them a part of your traversal as well as your combat. But that's just not necessary for a game like this. Uncharted, this is not, as much as Fallen Order desperately tries to be. I understand the idea behind this, being a Jedi means that you're inevitably quite agile. Respawn wanted to reflect this in the level design and force you to be agile. But forced is right, in more ways than one. There are moments where the terrain and the level design feel forced rather than natural. This is a pre-recorded video on YouTube, but I can see you're not convinced. That's fine. Let's use a specific example. The ice slides are widely criticised in Fallen Order, but I'm yet to hear an accurate explanation of why we don't like them and what they do to the level narration. It's not because of the janky platforming controls, though they're an issue as well. It's because they stick out as being so gamey in comparison to the rest of the experience. Respawn designed each planet with the intention of making you come back to it. On Zepho, you visit the first temple and then return later to visit a massive crashed clone ship and explore the second temple. So, here's a question for you. These are 2 huge areas which the game needs to introduce organically to the player. You can't have the crashed clone ship next to the tomb of Ilram. It would make the planet feel too small. And you can't just have the Mantis land in a second part of the planet. That would remove any excuse for backtracking. So, how do you do it? How do you keep these 2 temples far enough away that the planet feels big? Do you A. Go the Dark Souls route of just making more level, simple in design that the player needs to fight through? Or B, create a way for the player to travel long distances quickly, like an elevator or say, an ice slide. Because Respawn went B, the ice slide route. They refused to make straight pathways through thickets or mountainsides, as if they were worried that if the player engaged with the combat for too long, they would throw in the towel, which is a shame, because the best parts of Fallen Order are when you're marching through carefully placed foes like the facility on Kashyyyk. You're not lightsabering in Fallen Order as much as you think you are. Like I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, you're swinging a laser sword for about a third of your playtime. I'm gauging this from my own experience and the footage I collected, but that's it. Just a third. And that's purely down to the level design. All too often, a planet will give you ice slides and climbable walls rather than steady marches through enemy territory. Worse yet, sometimes you'll be stuck in a lift for about 30 full seconds while it transports you from one point to another, and all too rarely does the platforming and the combat connect. Despite my criticisms of this first ice slide on Zepho, at least there are enemies ready to blast you that you need to parry and dodge. After this point, there's a disturbance in the wonderful hypnotic combat system every time you leave an encounter and jump into a platforming section. There's no meshing of the two, no symbiosis. The first temple falls into a similar pitfall. There are a couple of enemies in here in the form of the Tomb Guardians, but this temple is all about the platforming, and once you reach the end of it and unlock the Force Push, it transforms into being all about the puzzles. Each temple trains the player in the ways of the Force before gaining a new Force ability. Our first sequence of puzzles in the Temple of Ilram are focused on pushing balls to activate far-off switches. There's enough freedom and creativity in how you solve most of the game's puzzles. For example, in the Tomb of Mictril, you need to set fire to some vines built around a rope to drop a ball from a great height. Oh, by the way, it's balls as far as the eye can see. The Zephins had something Freudian going on. Just look at how phallic these rock structures are. But anyway, yes, there are flames covered in magnetic balls. See, there it is again, that you need to launch at the rope. You can do this in two ways. You can go out of your way to activate the magnet and capture the lantern that way, or you can launch it in the air and use slow to stop it. Moments like these aren't overly common, but it wasn't until White Light's critique that I noted that the puzzles were more creative than I initially gave them credit for. Escaping the tomb lets us test out our new Force power on some dumbass stormtroopers who have been hot on our trail, which is a great way to give Cal a little bit of power creep. We feel empowered here, being able to leap around and finally combine our platforming with our combat in the form of the wind turbines which launch us into the air, and working our way back through the map in reverse, with doors and crevices now open to us due to shortcuts and the ability to knock down walls, completely opens Zepho up. All of the big three planets do this. The most fun I got out of Fallen Order's gameplay was when I was trekking back to the Mantis. Reaching the end of Zepho's first run also gives us our first official boss, for real this time. Yes, I know I've said that already, and yes, that's the point. When does this game's opening section end? The AT-ST battle is a great way to finish our first time on the planet. For the first time in the game, we're beginning to feel like a little bit of a cocky git, all things considered. We've been pushing stormtroopers off of cliffs and leaping all over the shop during combat. Now we have something that's going to give us a real challenge. The key with the AT-ST is in using our push ability to throw its projectiles back at it, as it's determined to keep us away from its legs with rockets, blasters, and bombs. And yes, you want another example of that sexy lipstick I keep harping on about? Well, how about this? I love it. This sort of stuff is just constant, and every time we get little Star Warsy details like the AT-ST pilot clambering out and trying to take us down, the grin on my face immediately wipes away any memory of the mismatched level design. But still, the AT-ST is the first plot-driven boss that we need to defeat. Think about that. We're on our third planet. Bizarre.
When the purge started, and our clone troops turned against us, my Padawan and I took several younglings and we went into hiding, but we didn't last long.
In a moment of reserved vulnerability, Seer tells Cal her story. The Empire kidnapped her and tortured her. It always felt, even in the original trilogy, that the Skywalker saga shied away from really exploring how dark and how f***ed up the Empire's day-to-day tyranny was. But I love this story from Cere. There's no implications about it. Cere was tortured to such an extent that she sold out her Padawan, basically her child. What sort of darkness was she exposed to that made her do such a thing? A good question for another time. For now, on to Kashyyyk. I've already covered why the AT-AT attack is both really fun and really boring simultaneously, but we haven't talked about the Forrest Whitaker in the room. Saw Gerrera has been shoehorned into the story for, well, I don't even know, to be honest. What's he doing here? What does he add to the story? Saw is a complex bastard of a guy, and setting him up here makes it feel like he's going to return later. But just like Jeffree Star's appalling history of racism, it's just forgotten. But Monty remembers. I have to think that Saw's inclusion was part of the Disney contract somehow. There had to be some continuity between the new movies and the game, and it feels as forced and trite as it sounds when you're playing. Hell, this whole section is riddled with pop-ins and such ruddy graphical fidelity that it spoils the fangasm energy you just got in the AT-AT. Saw pops in and out of scenes with you like a glitchy Force ghost, and the Wookiees, oh dear. Look, maybe my PS4 is just getting on in years, but for some reason Fallen Order ruptured my operating system. It only crashed once, but the textures would take an age to load in places, and that brief moment of pure space magic immersion was killed by the glitches and bugs. The game isn't brand new anymore. This stuff needs to be patched. Who made this? Square Enix?
Scout ahead to prepare the attack. Join us when you're ready. Go!
During your first time on Kashyyyk, it's less focused on the spiritual, natural majesty of the planet, and more focused on navigating a raging battle. Our task here is to rescue the Wookiees from their captivity, carefully stalking our stormtrooper prey through an Empire facility. Narratively, this whole planet is a bit of a dead end. The one Wookiee we need to speak to, Tarful, is nowhere to be seen, and by the time you get to the end of the level, you've rescued some Wookiees and assisted in the war effort, but you see it as a major divergence from the plot. It's also where the second most frustrating part of the level design peeks its head out from behind my fully stocked medicine cabinet. Squeezing through tight spaces as a means of loading parts of a level was cute the first time around, but when it's been repeated time and time and time again, you begin to see them for exactly what they are. At least Final Fantasy VII Remake had the excuse of being a ginormous game that ran smoothly on current-gen hardware, with Fallen Order slowing the pace of your exploration right down to shimmy through convenient crawl spaces just for the game to run like this at certain moments is inexcusable. Inexcusable. Oh, but hey look, a tough boss fight with a security droid in a cramped airlock. Oh yeah, the combat is so good, and I've got my lightsaber, wow, 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 wow. Oh, it looks so cool, like made you look's Darth Maul makeup. What were we talking about again? The structuring of each level feels confused somehow. Bogano, Zepho and Kashyyyk all finish with a boss fight against a standard enemy, except here they get a large health bar at the top of the screen and a small arena to battle them in. Ogdo Bogdo, the AT-ST, the security droid, they're just a first meeting with a tough enemy that we'll see a few times again before Cal's journey comes to an end. Finishing a level for the first time doesn't make us feel like we've completed this section of a world. It's kind of anticlimactic. Which, to be fair to the game, is possibly the point, because we don't complete a section of a world our first time through. We have to return to Zepho, Bogano, Kashyyyk, and Dathomir with new skills and abilities before the game is over. Returning with these abilities opens up new paths, utilising Metroidvania mechanics to evolve each level. So considering we now need to head back to Zepho to unearth the second tomb, let's look at the Metroidvania of it all. Now, in my Hollow Knight critique, I highlighted the two most important ways that we can judge how effective Metroidvania mechanics are: opening up the world and building a better hero. Fallen Order's abilities do open up the world, and they also build a better hero, but the seamlessness of these mechanics are hit or miss. First, we have Cal's Force abilities. slow, push, and pull are primarily for combat, but they're integrated into a lot of the platforming puzzles which are chunked into each level. Then there's wall run and the double jump. These are purely for platforming purposes, which has its own section later, but the point I'm getting at here is that some of the abilities open up the world, be it in a contrived way, and some of the abilities lean more heavily to building a better hero, rather than striking a delicate balance and assisting in both. I'm pretty sure a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, someone said balance was important. BD1 is much more blatant in his Metroidvania purpose. Venturing off the beaten path, you can find an overcharge, a scomp link, a powered zipline, and 2 different hacks. The probe and security droid hacks are extremely useful in combat. If you target these enemies first, you can turn the tide if you're beginning to feel overwhelmed by a group. The powered zipline lets a player go back and forth in your exploration, meaning backtracking is made supremely easier when you return to planets later. No longer is the player funneled along one direction after using a zipline. We can use this to turn around and go back the way we came if we so wish. This is great. But the scomp link and the overcharge might as well be a blue card key and a red card key for how they're used in the game. Whenever Cal comes across a funky chest or door that we need a particular upgrade to open, it feels forced. In the Tomb of Mictriel, we need to fight the second sister for a second time. Well, that's awkward wording. I love the unreserved glee she has when she says outstanding in our pre-battle scene. She's itching to get her claws into a worthy opponent, and she's frothing at the mouth for us to challenge her. Where in our first battle we just needed to take off about 1/10 of her health, here we need to knock her down to halfway. The second sister is even harder the second time around, and it forces the player to be on the defensive. She constantly employs unblockable attacks more often than even our final battle with her here, and it really engenders the player to feel weak against her. But once we reach the midpoint, BD1 saves the day and separates our hero and villain, meaning they get to have a classic verbal sparring match.
I'm surprised she didn't tell you. Sarah was never good at keeping secrets.
And you know her so well, huh?
She was weak, cracked in an Imperial torture chair, surrendered the location of her naive Padawan.
The prequels are a lot of things, but there's one scene which always stands out to me as some masterful cinematic storytelling. Remember when Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul were battling each other, but were separated by the security gates? Qui-Gon calmly, without a word being uttered, simply drops to his knees and starts meditating, becoming one with the Force and making the most of his time. In contrast, Darth Maul paces back and forth, restless and angry like a rabid dog, not at all at peace, but itching to fight further. We learn everything about our two combatants without a word of dialogue being uttered. This scene isn't necessarily an homage to that moment, but it's similar in what it shows us. Cal and Trilla are openly conversing. Cal isn't a patient master like Qui-Gon is, and Trilla isn't a Sith apprentice like Maul was. Both are, maturity-wise, of equal measure as far as their understanding of the Force is concerned. The two of them are desperate to fight each other. All of Cal's resentfulness towards the Empire is expressed in how open he is in his conversation with Trilla, and Trilla is manipulative in her words, revealing that Seer has been lying to us, and that she is the Padawan who our new mentor sold out. Even after finally escaping from Trilla, she intercepts our comms and continues to rattle Cal while we explore deeper into the tomb, worming her way into his ear like a confident user of the dark side. And it also provides some purpose to our exploration. We now have a real motivation to take down Trilla. She's mocking us, insulting us, and it creates a strong tie between the player's motivations and Cal's. We want to take her down. Conquering the tomb, learning Pool, and realizing we need to venture to Dathomir to collect the next MacGuffin, our journey back to the Mantis is interrupted when we run into a droid hunter. Again, watching the world evolve and react to the narrative beats keeps our exploration feeling fresh. We've conquered the tomb, so this boss has suddenly appeared. And whilst it's yet another story-based boss that we have to lose to, the way we're knocked out and a strange foreign word appears on the screen, reawaken, is a really cool way to blend the feeling of a dynamic encounter with a story-based moment. Because unfortunately for Cal, he's just been captured, leading us into combat and movement. Trying to find your way out of Ordo Iris without BD1 or your lightsaber really makes you feel like you've lost an arm, and the way the puzzles have been designed to force us to think Uncharted rather than Star Wars is enough to make us desperate to find our little metal buddy again. Talk about some solid emotional pacing. Being reunited with BD, especially with the way the music swells and his ridiculous little sounds, is enough to make us want to hug our screens. Or at least enough to make me want to hug my screen. It's not long before it's revealed that this entire setup is a reality TV show where captives are broadcast across the galaxy and need to fight in a gladiator-style arena. We need to work through difficult gauntlets of enemies, leading up to a chance for us to exact our revenge on the droid hunter that nabbed us before. I love that in between all of the Empire stuff and the magical ancient race jargon, Fallen Order takes a moment to initiate us into a snippet of the underworld, and it's led by the song we heard right at the beginning, filling the venue with a bit of space rock and roll to psych us up before the battle ahead. So, with us in a battle to the death, it's about that time to talk about the best thing about Fallen Order's mechanics: the combat. I'm a major advocate for games stealing great ideas from each other. For example, I've advocated for Assassin's Creed to steal the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor in the past. Properly too, not the half-assed version we saw in Odyssey. Fallen Order, stealing from Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and most of all Sekiro, sounds like a match made in heaven. And for the most part, it is. Wielding a lightsaber has never felt more weighty and devastating. The finisher animations have so much pizzazz that when Cal goes in for that final blow, it's like the Force itself is acting through him. Bugs get chopped in half, stormtroopers flail as they fall back, and the zombie witches of Dathomir crumble like dust beneath its razor heat. But Cal also isn't made of steel. You can take massive amounts of damage, particularly in the first half of the game, and having your attacks interrupted can be so frustrating that a player needs to take a deep breath before a combat encounter, almost as if we ourselves are meditating before striking down our foes. There's a variety of enemies to battle too, all of which have unique movesets and strategies to take on, but they can generally be divided into 5 camps: bugs, droids, animals, humanoid foes wielding weapons, and big bastards. Bugs are often small, irritating little blighters, more of a nuisance in a group than anything else. They regularly only require 1 or 2 swings to take down, and once you unlock the pull ability, dragging them towards us and blasting them into their pals can be extremely satisfying. There are only 2 droid types for us to face: the security droids, who are at first really taxing to face off against, often repeating heavy and uninterruptible attacks, and the probe droids. There's a really nice evolution of both of these from pain in the ass to necessary allies in the late game, but I am disappointed that we only get these 2. I remember entering the clone ship for the first time on Zepho and getting my hopes up that there would be a rogue faction of separatist droids dully guarding the temple, but hey, maybe that's something for the sequel. Animals can be cleaved through in 1 hit if you can pull off a half-decent parry, but their innate randomness and attack patterns can make them a real challenge to take down. The rats on Zepho, which leap out of the ground and ambush you, were my number 1 cause of death on my first playthrough, and the slug, things on Kashyyyk are the worst enemies to ever be created in a video game. Seriously, kick these guys over and douse a gallon of salt on them. They are so frustrating to battle due to their lack of telegraphing. Are they going in for a light attack? Well, they're going to move their head. Are they going to vomit acid on the ground? Well, they're going to move their head. Do anything except move your head, you slimy git. The humanoid foes come in a few forms: stormtroopers, night brothers, and purge troopers. And aside from the basic blaster enemies, these are inevitably the most fun enemies to fight. They allow you to make the most of your lightsaber, coming as close to Jedi versus Sith duels as the game will get outside of boss fights. The stormtroopers are absolutely hilarious in their dialogue. Once you wipe out all of their friends, they'll often start to panic and basically wish for death as they watch you slowly march towards them. The Purge Troopers are enough to fill you with dread. Their gravelly, deep bass voices, laughing while they whirl through the air to smack you about with a quick flurry of attacks, always sets my teeth on edge, even on my second playthrough. The big bastards act as mini-bosses that get littered throughout each level. The The Wishcock spiders are running rampant on Kashyyyk, often requiring some careful sidestepping to maneuver their massive barrel attacks. Or there's the Nidocs on Dathomir, which aimlessly roam and, once killed, fall back into a lunging attack for one final gotcha moment. Often these gits have a big daddy version of them waiting nearby as an optional boss for us to really test our skills against. And Cal has finished facing off against a good chunk of these enemies in the arena, so it's time to get back to Kashyyyk.
She told me you betrayed her to the Empire. Is it true?
She'll say anything to jeopardize this mission.
Is it true?
She was my apprentice.
Cal confronting Cere creates some serious team-wide tension on the ship, and this scene highlights one of the things which makes this team so interesting. Quick writing tip for any budding authors out there: if somebody tells you that your character is unlikable and you're looking for a quick fix, well, make sure you have an all is lost moment somewhere in your story. Grease's all is lost moment is when he thinks his gambling debt has gotten Cal killed. The way he's so embarrassed about it was what immediately warmed me to him. As for Cere, well, God bless Cere. I'd be happy with a whole game about Cere. Our new mentor goes through complete hell before the game's events, and the very fact that Cal, her spark of hope, distrusts her so completely after learning she had, inevitably, kept secrets from us is heartbreaking to see. When we arrive on Kashyyyk, Trilla has already beaten us to it, and it seems Saw Gerrera has abandoned the Wookiees when it got too dicey. What a dick. Ultimately, we're tasked with climbing to the top of the origin tree on Kashyyyk, a mystical ground zero for the Force which the Wookiees worship. Oh, and hey, whilst we head over to the origin tree, we can even see some of the enemies interacting with each other. This is one of the neatest touches in the game. The galaxy feels alive with all of our foes, less like they're enemies placed waiting for us, and more like they're enemies undergoing a natural cycle, protecting their territory, hunting each other, standing guard near valuable resources, or just nesting nearby. As for the moment-to-moment gameplay, the parry mechanic is king. Praise the parry, worship its greatness, because mastering it is what will strengthen Cal's characterization as a powerful Jedi. There are few things more satisfying than running into battle, deflecting some blasts back at nearby stormtroopers, and parrying a shock trooper's baton so perfectly it opens to a one-hit kill. Both Cal and many of his combatants have a stagger meter, which can be depleted with a decent parry or a well-timed attack. In a one-on-one fight, these can feel like a delicate dance. Saying all of that, a side-by-side comparison with Sekiro is inevitable here. Now look, Fallen Order will never feel as tight and polished as Sekiro. I'm pretty sure it was a famous bounty hunter who mentioned that things were always worse a second time around, and yes, Fallen Order is worse than Sekiro in applying its combat system. But it's always important to qualify a statement like that, isn't it? How much worse, and in what ways are these mechanics less successful? Because Fallen Order is still a very satisfying combat system, but if you're to replace the lightsaber with a sword and lose your Force-tinted glasses, you'll notice some cracks. The greatest issue is that whilst parrying is sensory and a joy to handle, sometimes the rewards don't make it worth the effort, especially with boss fights and big bastards. Some enemies, like the tougher Purge Troopers, can take up to 10 parries to drop their bar to 0, and your reward is the ability to go in for 1 or 2 slashes, which drops about a fifth of their health. This can drag battles out, because you have to do the same lengthy dance with a Purge Trooper 5 times, perfectly parrying them for a total of 50 times in a fight, in order just to get a decent hit in. With a lot of these enemies, particularly one boss we meet later on Dathomir, the attacks are so quick and powerful that if you trip up once during their lengthy combos, you can get stuck in an attack loop. If Fallen Order was going to steal from Sekiro, I wish it stole the perfect parry system which can take off a huge chunk of damage from an enemy for truly enhancing your skill. Respawn seemed to make the telegraphing window of most enemies relatively easy to time, even on Grandmaster difficulty. But the prize you get for a perfect set of parries sometimes feels stingy at best. Here at the Origin Tree, our focus is less on parrying, and more on the dodge, duck, dip, dive and dodge strategy we commonly see in other Souls-likes. It's a long climb to the top, mixing together lengthy combat sections against the local creatures and fauna, as well as the deadly traps which wait in the form of alien Venus flytraps and deadly flowers which chase you down. The forest is alive, hunting us down, desperate to make us leave this place. It's not a place of evil, but it's treacherous. It's just a shame then that the strange way that the planets artificially segment the platforming sections from the combat sections is a little too obvious here. Once we get into the Origin Tree, all combat is thrown out the window and we're forced to climb and swim and leap on squishy plants. Cal gets a breather here, which again is just contextual. There are no water areas in any of the previous worlds to return to and explore using this. The breather is only really useful in the Origin Tree now, and Ilum later.
What will you all do now?
The only thing we can. Keep fighting.
Good luck. Hope we meet again.
As we climb higher and higher, Cal's guilt at leading Trilla to Kashyyyk becomes clearer and clearer. It's by far his greatest character flaw. He feels responsible for every bad thing which happens over the course of the game. He expects everyone, including himself, to be perfect, righteous, good. Saw Gerrera's cowardice in abandoning the Wookiees clearly rubs him up the wrong way. Cere's affinity for secrets makes him feel betrayed. If it was handled with any less care, it would be easy to be annoyed by Cal, to be desperate to wrench him from his soapbox, but there's such earnestness in his trying to do the right thing that we just feel sorry for him. Survivor's guilt can be a powerful thing. He even feels responsible for the care of the Shio bird which guards the Origin Tree, and our exhaustion at being forced through another monotonous platforming section is painted over when it carries Cal, BD1 and the player high over the sky. Talk about good lipstick. There's something so wholesome about Cal and his adventure. The tone that's set makes us just feel less cynical about the fact that Fallen Order has been wallowing around in another game's sty to get ideas for its mechanics. This is some pure space fantasy, riding an ancient, gigantic bird to the top of a magical force tree. I can't help myself. SkillUp described playing Fallen Order like coming home, and it's moments like these which I point to when I agree with him. Oh, you bitch, I'm gonna shove that lightsaber up your scaly arse. The Ninth Sister is a fantastic boss fight. I love a baddie that just keeps coming back, and I'm so glad that Trilla isn't the only Inquisitor we get to face off against. She was a looming, mocking figure at the start of the game, and during our time on the Origin Tree we get to face her again and again. She appears to rip into us, then chases us down during a high-octane chase sequence. Sure, the chase is another friggin' slide, but the fact we're being chased down by an Inquisitor that we've already spoken to a couple of times makes this feel exciting. She's every bit as exciting at the top of the Origin Tree as well. We're furious with her for killing the Shio bird, and we get a nice, long, tough battle to exhaust our rage. She has 2 phases, with a gradual climb in difficulty. Because she's so big, her reach can be wide, meaning Cal can't stand in one place for too long. But if your parry game is strong, you can sidestep her and get a few cheap swipes in to whittle down her health. By this point in our journey, we've managed to wield slow, force push and force pull, allowing us to knock enemies off of ledges or pull them towards us for a quick one-hit kill. However, Force Unleashed this is not. Cal has a force meter needed for, well, pretty much all of his interesting attacks, and this force meter, even with all of the upgrades, is simply too small. Much too small. Like James Charles's £150 brush set? What the fuck? But yes, like with a lot of makeup, we're not getting enough for our money here, especially when the game assigns moves like a bloody overhead strike as a force ability. Respawn, how is this a force ability? What about splitting your lightsaber in 2? How is that a force ability? All Cal's doing is clicking a button on his lightsaber. This has sweet FA to do with the force. Anyway, against the Ninth Sister, our force powers are generally useless. She's simply too big and too strong, so the player needs to become an expert in the parry, dodge, hit tactics which are harboured in so many Soulslikes. This might actually be my favourite boss fight in the game. Defeating the Ninth Sister, there's a terrifying moment where it looks like she'll enter into a 3rd phase. In an effort to end the battle, Cal doesn't outright kill her, he blasts her out of the origin tree, adding the Ninth Sister to a long line of bosses that Cal doesn't actually finish off himself. I don't know if this was purposeful or not, but all of our big story bosses don't die by our hand. The Ninth Sister, Malicos, the Gorgora, Trilla, the game seems to be so terrified of just letting us kill a boss. If you were being a total wank about it, you could argue that it's all in an effort to portray Cal as a pacifist, not a Jedi Knight, but a monk. He doesn't kill. But to that, I'd say,
move in, brother! I will avenge them all.
Climbing back down the origin tree, Cal returns to the Mantis, having conquered Kashyyyk and earned himself a cheeky little double jump. The team decide it's time to head to Dathomir. You can go to Dathomir at the start of the game if you so wish, and doing so will nab you the double-sided lightsaber for some quality crowd control. Introducing a second stance and a whole new moveset of upgrades and combos adds a whole new level of depth to the combat that you may have missed on your first playthrough. Whilst the skill tree has some ridiculous abilities like the overhead swing, I will die on this field of battle, I swear to God. Video games, please stop adding heavy attacks to your skill tree. They are not interesting abilities. But many of these abilities are really interesting upgrades, like being able to throw your lightsaber to distant foes, giving you a ranged attack which isn't related to pushing or pulling a bad guy. You don't level up like you would traditionally do in a Soulsborne game. Again, Fallen Order pulls from Sekiro above all others. You unlock new movesets, not just greater strength or dexterity. To unlock these, you need to wangle some XP from enemies, which then converts into skill points. Each new upgrade will cost 1, 2, or 3 skill points, so you're encouraged to engage in a combat whenever you come across a new foe. I never skipped past an opportunity to cut down a wandering trooper. While the game is challenging, make no mistake, the challenge is slightly lessened by the punishment you get for dying. If a stormtrooper gets lucky and guns you down, you don't lose your skill points, your upgrade currency, just the XP you've earned leading up to each skill point. And honestly, I wish there was a way to turn this off for players wanting a really punishing experience. Even then, you can run in and recollect your XP, by swiping an enemy once with your weapon rather than defeating them altogether. It's a shame. Again, if they were going to steal from Soulslikes, I wish they went all in. Speaking of death, on Dathomir you're going to die a lot. It's a punishingly difficult landscape, with tight corridors, enemies hiding in ambush, and the labyrinthian design means that platforming sections are short and mercifully intercut with enemies. It's by far my favourite planet of the game, despite being the most grim to explore. Because it's such a wasteland, getting to the temple is more complicated than it has been on previous planets, less streamlined, and as a result, there's an openness to its exploration which encourages the player to be creative. Well, not too creative, because it's time to talk about the most clumsy system in the game, the platforming. We've already discussed how the levels are generally spliced together with random sliding sections to give a planet a greater sense of scale, but the actual implementation of the mechanics leaves a lot to be desired as well. And again, remember, this is at least a third of the game's playtime, if not slightly more. The worst thing about the platforming is how consistently contextual it always is. When you unlock the wall run, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you can start running along the side of any flat surface. But that's simply not true. You can only run along surfaces the game wants you to. The same goes for climbing. At numerous points you'll think that Cal can climb up a wall, like this bugger here, but for some reason Cal point blank refuses to run up it. This is clearly done to make the double jump more useful later on. If Cal could wall run or climb up any surface, then it would make the double jump less useful, and areas of the level design which have been randomly blocked off until we can hop in the air could be exploited. Again, if you cast your mind back to the beginning of the game and the beginning of this video, the chromostereopsis has been dropped altogether. No longer is the player encouraged to follow the yellow or the red, despite being trained to do so for 2 hours on Bracket and Bogano. So now we're stuck, confusedly trial and erroring any potential platforming on Dathomir and losing health for every failure. It goes against the Souls-like philosophy of being cautious and careful in our traversal, and instead, you're likely to just start launching Cal at surfaces in the hope you'll stick to them. Again, we can see why Respawn did this. The platforming sections are achingly designed to force the player to play the game's way rather than their own way. You have to leap from this rope and use pull to grab the other rope, rather than swing over to a nearby wall and run along the surface. You can't possibly climb up this surface, even though it looks climbable. You need to unlock the climbing clause later. Overall, the emphasis on platforming keeps the Metroidvania mechanics feeling restrictive, rather than opening them up new ways to play. Every new ability has a set purpose, and you better not think outside of the box. This is an EA game, darn it, we won't be having any of that around here. Contextual climbing is a victim of the homogenization of last gen. I desperately beg Respawn that if they're going to keep the incessant platforming in Fallen Order 2, then they at least take the time to let the player have more freedom with these moves. Our time on Dathomir is perpetuated by Night Sister Merrin, who's absolutely raging that a Jedi would even dare to come here. Merrin's backstory is really fascinating. Just like Cal, she's carrying a heavy chain around her neck, living with the guilt of surviving the purge of her sisters. The arch of her backstory is interesting, sure, but a lot of the really fascinating details are buried in the corners of the map. It's honestly just a shame that she doesn't join the team until the very end of the game. Her control over magic and her own inner struggle bounces off of Cal really nicely and provides him some much needed context, bringing him out of his own problems and considering the needs of other people. It's also here that we meet Taran Malicos.
A fellow wanderer. I see you met the resident Night Sister, but unlike most, you're alive.
Honestly, the ominous music playing beneath our initial meeting with him should have given it away, but idiot that I am, I initially trusted Malicos. I did. The long cloak, the big beard, the wise, worldly way that he empathizes with being hunted by Merrin. He's clearly supposed to pop up like Ben Kenobi at the beginning of A New Hope, but Malicos' story is far more strange and seedy than that. And it also joins the long line of things which Respawn steals from. Taran Malicos is just Kurtz from Heart of Darkness, a man who conquered and tricked the locals into embracing him as their leader. Merrin is in reluctant servitude to Malicos, and it's clear he's gone mad since the events of Order 66, a sign to Cal of what he may become if he doesn't let down his walls and embrace the Force once again. Dathomir ends with a boss fight against the Gorgora, which is at first a tough battle against a huge opponent, dealing massive damage and causing Cal to stagger a lot. The trick here is to slow the Gorgora when it slams one of its massive talons onto you for a few hits in. Rinse, repeat, and keep your guard up. But before you can finish it off, it scurries out of the cave with 10% of its health left, leading into yet another one of those patented Star Wars moments. This takes a leaf right out of the AT-AT climb on Kashyyyk. It's high energy, with Cal needing to escape from the beast's clutches and then fly through the air to bury his lightsaber into its skull. The idea and concept is an exciting change of pace, but it's not what I'm playing Fallen Order for. All I wanted to do was have a straight up simple boss fight in an arena, and now Respawn have me ridiculously flying through the air, desperately trying to land on the Gorgora. None of my previous skills are tested in the final moments of the fight. Again, the intriguing combat systems which have been set up seems to have been scrapped for more on-rails sections, and as a result it just leaves a sour taste in the player's mouth. Defeating the Gorgora, we head back to Dathomir's tomb and psych ourselves up for another lengthy puzzle sequence. But when we arrive, something strange happens. We flash back to the past and are suddenly playing as a young Cal, off to training. And you know what that means.
Master, are you okay? No!
Oh no. Oh no. We get to witness Order 66 first hand. We play as a young Cal, desperately trying to escape the Jedi Purge. Big Daddy T'Pol guides us as we race past the clones, hearing them hunt for us and our master. Whilst the tutorialization of the game's system can be overly long at times, there's some lipstick in the form of intriguing, story-relevant flashbacks to Cal's Padawan days that we experience every time we earn a new ability. They build a relationship between the player and Jaro T'Pol. It bonds the player and Cal in our trust in Jaro. He's a literal mentor to the player as well as Cal in how he teaches us our new abilities in the Jedi training room. We get to see Cal's young naivety, his struggles with mastering the Force in the older days, and not only do these flashbacks give us a brief teaching moment in how to harness our new powers, and here in the final training moment, the game introduces us to a cheeky fake out where a clone trooper appears and starts randomly firing at us. Any fan of the series will know that it's likely Respawn are using these flashback sequences to build to Order 66, and for a split second we think, oh god, it's happening, here it comes, just to have our dread drop away from us when we realise it's just part of the training montage. But that fake out is in service of another fake out, and as we try to fight to one of the escape pods, we witness the moment when Jaro T'Pol, in an effort to save Cal, sacrifices himself to save him. The grimness of Cal needing to sit in the escape pod with T'Pol's dead body is enough to make us ultimately understand where his PTSD and guilt comes from, and for cat-eyed players, it even puts the image we're faced with in the main menu into full context. Every time we boot up the game, we see the same vision that Cal sees every time he closes his eyes. The shuttle blasting off of the space station, the moment that his world changed. In his rage and fear, he short-circuits his lightsaber. A vision of Jaro T'Pol gaslights him, blaming Cal for his death. Merrin appears and raises the dead to chase us down. Malicos opens up about being a dark side user and is about to strike us down when we're helpless. The race back to the Mantis makes us feel weak and powerless in the face of such impossible odds. And this is almost a perfect all is lost moment. But the Force isn't done with Cal yet.
Master T'Pol, I saw the day he died. I saw what I did. Now it's destroyed.
One of the things I love most about Fallen Order is its relationship with the Star Wars mythos and, most importantly, the Force. I remember when The Last Jedi was announced, the images of Luke and Rey training on a mystical, forgotten island in a far-off corner of the galaxy. I remember hearing from Rian Johnson that the movie was going to get a little weird, and what I imagined from all of that was that we were going to learn a lot more into the space wizard stuff and the nature of the Force, and less into the Empire 2.0. Now, look, this video isn't about The Last Jedi, but one of its big disappointments to me was that when I left the cinema, I felt like the movie was more about the audience's relationship with the Force and less about the character's relationship. Jedi Fallen Order, being a video game, is able to blend the two together, and I think it does that masterfully. Cal shuts himself off from the Force. Cere is terrified of losing herself to the dark side, having seen what it can do, and Trilla has warped the Force into a cruel power. But what all three characters have in common is that they are constantly thinking about their relationship with the Force. Fallen Order isn't afraid of the fantasy part of its genre, despite the fact that the Force is another mechanic we use to fight and platform. Its presentation in the game is a love letter to a simpler time in the original trilogy, when the Force was more ethereal, less understood, and as a result, much more fascinating than just stealing necklaces. The history of Fallen Order's version of Star Wars is legitimately interesting. We get to explore facets of Star Wars lore to an even deeper level, and nowhere shows this better than Ilum. Because Cal's lightsaber is broken, Cere suggests he go on a pilgrimage to the Jedi Temple in Ilum to find a Kyber crystal. Travelling deeper with BD-1, Cal tells little tidbits of his Jedi training, of how it was Grandmaster Yoda who would await them within, of how he felt when he first got his lightsaber. It's enough to fill a player with awe, and the way Cal has to break into the temple here is a perfect blend of characterization and level design. Cal doesn't feel like he belongs here. He doesn't feel worthy of the call of the Force. He's really shaken up by what we witnessed on Dathomir. We, the player, and he, the Jedi, are intruding on this sacred place. I've always really liked the idea of the Force gifting particular abilities to Jedi, and I hope in the sequel we get even more interpretations of this. Kyle's psychometry is a clever in-game reason for us to find Force echoes throughout the world, collecting snippets of stories which reveal lore tidbits in a similar vein to how Dark Souls' item descriptions work. We can use these to string together a sequence of events, like the reason behind Merrin's alliance with Malicos on Dathomir, or even witness a cool wee story about a Jedi cutting down clones while on the run after Order 66. The world building is consistently otherworldly too, like the very concept of the Zepho, of an ancient race that were Force users long before the Jedi and the Sith even existed. That's bloody fascinating. What happened to them? Why did their race die out? Are there any Zepho left? It's enough to make me take stock of the game's plot in relation to the wider world building and really feel like Fallen Order is adding something of substance to the greater whole, especially when the Zepho tombs are full of neat snippets of information about the race themselves. The Zepho don't just exist to guide us along in a hunt for a MacGuffin. Respawn have developed a whole reason for this race's civilization to fall, and we see it etched into the world design of each tomb. In Migtriel, the Force echoes and darker, more desolate colour palette and architecture reveal to the player the moment when the Zepho began to abuse the Force, focusing more on vanity and pride rather than an intrinsic oneness. It's very good lipstick. Cal's journey through Ilum is filled with wonder, but the active gameplay of this section is as dull as dishwater. First, there's the obtuse light puzzle, which, as it's presented, is more trite and out of place than any of the puzzles which came before. Also, while we're here, BD-1's hint system is both too obvious sometimes, butting its head in while you're trying to use your brain, and way too obtuse at others. Clear that Respawn felt like some thoughtful gameplay had to happen here to make Ilum feel a lot larger than it actually was. Sometimes a level is short, and that's okay. Come on, Cal, you're telling me that every time a Padawan had to get their lightsaber, Master Yoda had to remelt this ice? Bruh, please. But, Ilum also holds one of the strongest Star Wars moments of the entire series, movies, books, and beyond.
No! Yeah!
There's a lot to explore here, so let's break it down. Before, I mentioned that an all is lost moment should be the scene where a player, or a viewer even, realizes that they really care about a character, rather than just watch them go on an adventure. Now, you need to be really careful with your all is lost moment. If you have it too early in the story, then you haven't given your audience enough time to grow invested in your character. If you leave it too late, then you don't give your story enough time to breathe before rushing to the finale. This isn't focused on a hero having a disheartened moment either. Don't conflate the all is lost scene with just an obstacle for your hero to overcome. For it to really have impact, you need to kick your hero while they're down. Let's take a more relevant example to show you what I mean. In Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker battles Darth Vader in Cloud City. It's an exhilarating battle, but that isn't what we remember it for. It's for, well, this moment.
He told me you killed him. No. I am your father.
Luke is at the end of his rope. Vader has just chopped off his lightsaber arm and the blade has fallen with it. Remember, by this point in Star Wars history, all we knew of Vader was he was very powerful and absolutely ruthless. Luke losing his hand isn't just disheartening, it's outright terrifying for a first-time viewer. There doesn't seem to be a way out. And just when it seems things can't get any worse, Luke, in a fury, with tears in his eyes, has the mother of all bombshells dropped on his lap. Darth Vader, the most powerful, most evil creature in the galaxy, didn't kill his father, he is his father. Luke isn't the son of a war hero, he's related to a monster. That is an all is lost moment, kicking our hero while they're down. Fallen Order kicks Cal too, but in a very different way. Reliving Order 66 and breaking his lightsaber, the one memory he has of his old master, is the game's equivalent of Vader chopping off Luke's hand. His only hope is to form a bond with a kyber crystal and install it into a new lightsaber. Seems easy enough, right? But Cal's link to the Force is still full of rage and guilt, and he hasn't fully embraced the call of the Force yet. So the crystal reacts to him, and it shatters in his hand. We know this is the reason the crystal breaks, because the last thing Cal does before he finds the kyber crystal is look out for BD-1. He clings to an icy ledge which is about to break, and his first instinct, his first reaction, is to tell BD-1 to stay back. He refuses to let anyone else get hurt because of him, because from his perspective, so many people have been hurt because of him. Jaro Tapal, Prof, the Wookiees, the Shield Bird. He refuses to let his one friend in the whole galaxy get hurt. This is the all is lost moment. I mean it, this scene is better character and lore work than anything we got from the new trilogy. For all of Fallen Order's flaws, I will always thank it for this. As Cal collapses to the floor, BD-1, our little beacon of hope, plays back an old hologram of Cordova, our sage, our guide on this journey, in an effort to will some life back into Cal. And it inspires in Cal a new energy, a new fighting chance. And in that moment, both Cal and BD-1 are united in their sorrow and their grief for the death of a mentor and a friend. Cal for T'Pol and Prof, and BD-1 for Cordova. And where the game could have lazily just had the Force repair the crystal for him, Fallen Order doesn't rely on the lazy contrivance of because the Force like the new trilogy does. Cal uses his experience as a scrapper, as an engineer, to use both pieces of the kyber crystal to create a new lightsaber which can split into two. Yes, Ilum is boring in its moment-to-moment gameplay, but the lipstick is so good here you can almost taste it. I think it might be bubblegum flavoured. We get to build a new lightsaber in an old forgotten Jedi temple. We even get to choose a colour other than blue or green for the first time in the game, and if all of this doesn't combine to be a royal fist pump moment, then I'm sorry, I don't know what makes you happy, because it ain't Star Wars and it ain't good storytelling. Charging out into the snowy wilderness of Ilum, the game even throws numerous mid-tier enemies at us to let us try out our new upgrade. And after going for so long without a lightsaber once again, feeling the beam in our hands with a new incredibly strong swipe attack is ridiculously empowering. We feel at one with the Force. And if there's just one thing that Fallen Order is a master at, it's making us feel connected spiritually to that mystifying presence. Hell, I feel so good about this that I'm even going to do the YouTuber thing of commenting on someone else's video in this one. As a massive fan of White's Light, I have to say that I strongly disagree with his critique of the meditation system in Fallen Order. He argues that the bonfire system in Dark Souls had a narrative reason for existing. Death was barely a figment in that world, and our very existence as the chosen undead meant that when we die, and die again, and all of the enemies respawn, it felt consistent with the story. It's one of the things which made it powerful. In contrast, the meditation points in Fallen Order, to him at least, are lazy. They don't have a narrative reason for existing. I disagree with this for two reasons. The first is that whilst, yes, the meditation checkpoints which dot your progression are basically bonfires, they're a lot more like the checkpoints in Sekiro, and that game's subtitle is Shadows Die Twice, not Shadows Die 50 billion times to Genichiro. So if we're really getting into the nitty-gritty about ludonarrative dissonance, Sekiro fumbled the ball first. But the second is that whilst this isn't explained in-universe and it's merely an interpretation by myself, I didn't see the meditation points as bonfires which respawned an enemy. Anytime I died and was reset to a meditation point, I viewed my successful journey as canon, and any deaths as just image training, like in Dragon Ball. Cal would sit, meditate, and plan the route ahead. If he charged in and died, this was him imagining the different paths he could take, the strategies he could use, and which ones he would fail at. When we finally get up and make it through a gauntlet of enemies, that is the real life version of his journey. You can disagree with this interpretation all you like, but I pulled that from the game, and the main reason was because of how powerfully it presented the Force elsewhere. Anyway, we've ruminated on the wonders of the galaxy for long enough. It's time to return to Dathomir. Dathomir's tomb is not a puzzle section, it's just a straightforward jog to the boss. Well, almost straightforward. Cal needs to face off against Jaro Tapal once again, and why this isn't an actual boss fight I will never know. I understand the sentiment, the point is Cal isn't supposed to fight back, he's just supposed to give in, but it's handled really poorly. You can't press the right directional button until prompted, meaning you need to fight him for a little bit, but there are no health bars or force meters, so the whole thing is tensionless. Surely, Respawn, you wanted us to feel the anticipation which Cal does when T'Pol appears? Setting him up as a boss and making us fight him down, at least half health, would strengthen the illusion here. Instead, the first time a player sees T'Pol, they immediately know what's happening here, that we can't die. You can't have our strategy focused on maintaining resources and wangling an eye over to the UI for most of your game and then scrap it all together while expecting us to take a healthless battle seriously. Cal refuses to give in to his anger and his guilt, and he passes the test of the Force, taking one step closer to being at peace. Luckily for any players frustrated by T'Pol's boss fight fakeout, Malicos is waiting for us ahead. And he is boss enough. Cal and Merrin make nice before the battle takes place, with Cal deciding to disarm himself and chuck his lightsaber to her to prove he doesn't want to hurt her. You're being pretty reckless with our new lightsaber, Cal. As a boss, Malicos is arguably the toughest fight in the game. Yes, even tougher than the final boss. He's fast for a start, and almost relentless in his attacks. This is the battle where you'll realise just how stingy the parry rewards truly are, because in order to hurt him, you often need to knock his parry gauge right down, and any opening you get will often just lead to 2 or 3 swift hits, doing very little in the way of percentage damage. The arena is wide enough that he can leap away from us quite quickly, but he closes the gap so fast as well that it's rare you get much of a breather from his moves, and his second phase just doubles his speed, reach, and intensity in attacks. Luckily for us, we get to work with Merrin when he evolves, and she can step in to momentarily stun him. So for players who are struggling with the battle, we get a helping hand of baby's first Dark Souls in the fact that all you need to do is wait him out. Keep your guard up and avoid his stronger attacks, long enough for Merrin to leap to our rescue. He's also the only combatant with a boss run, which has always struck me as bizarre. Are you Soulslike or not, Fallen Order? It's not even a difficult boss run either. You can run around the two Knight brothers guarding the way, but for some reason his battle is segmented off by another squeezable crack. This is a major oversight and should have been cut.
What is this? It's like you said, Malikos. Dothamir will be your grave.
And to add insult to injury, is yet another story-based boss who we don't get to finish off ourselves. Merrin buries him alive, rather than letting us cut him down. Which again, sure, yeah, fine, I get it. Merrin has more history with Malicos, he's her baddie to finish off. But because this is the millionth time this has happened, it kinda stings. Regardless, Malicos' end means we've got the final key and are ready to head back to Bogano. In the words of Sherlock Strange, we're in the end game now. I know that the game's ending has been criticised for having, quote, no point or whatever, but I think those who rip into the final moments too hard have missed the point. Fallen Order is an intensely personal story. It's all about Cal coming to terms with who he is in this new, frightening galaxy, with moving on from the grief of his past. When Merrin raises the legitimately great point that ripping these children away from their secret homes might just paint a target on their back, it plants a seed of doubt in Cal's mind. Don't forget that this is only 5 years after the fall of the Jedi Order. There's no rebellion yet. There's no group which is amassed which could help Cal. Grouping a bunch of Force users in one place will surely lead to such a disturbance that the Empire will hunt them down in days. And Cal's Force vision makes this seem inevitable. It's a great bit of story. Cal sees his resentment of the Empire ultimately getting the better of him. He points out that he would train the Padawan first with physical training, growing stronger in their combat abilities using the Force, rather than concentrating on the most important thing, the spirituality. He would embrace what needs to be done to protect them, but as a result, their sensitivity will grow, and it will ultimately lead the Inquisitors to their door. We see the Zepho, or at least a vision of the Zepho, warning him of what will pass. Crawling up a wall turns into crawling through a trench, a horrific battle where he watches the Padawan die. He would agree to join the Inquisitors just to keep the remaining Padawan alive after their capture, becoming the very thing he hates the most. The gameplay itself reinforces this. As you run through, the station doors will close on you, blocking your path, forcing you down just one route, highlighting that this is a path which will happen. It's completely unchangeable, at least to Cal. The lights shut off, and we jam the block button to illuminate our path, and sweet Jesus, it's red, and if Star Wars has ever taught me anything, it's that red equals bad. We witness firsthand and are forced to play in a similar way to how we were forced to play through Order 66, the downfall of Cal Kestis, Jedi Master. This is what will await if he decides to use the holocron and re-establish the Order. He's not strong enough to fight the Empire. That path waits for someone else. And purely because of how confidently the game presents this to us, the player swallows it whole. Yes, Mr. Video Game. Thank you, Mr. Video Game. Maybe using the holocron is a bad idea. Honestly, the presentation of the last hours of the game feel like it was designed by an outsider, brought in to help with the ending. It's so far removed from the clunky, mashed-together design of the rest of the game, and so focused on genuine, impactful storytelling above all else, that I wonder if perhaps this later section was designed first. It doesn't feel like the tired finale we so often see in games of this caliber. The third battle with the second sister puts this on full display. I told you this was a boss arena. When we're released from the vision, there she is, waiting for us, prepared to cut us down and steal the holocron. The way the lighting is used in these final moments is on another level. A rolling shadow falls over our fight, highlighting the conflict between Cal and Trilla, light and dark. The battle itself is a fairly standard one, except this time, with our new powers, we need to cut Trilla down to just a quarter of her health. But she hasn't embraced her full control of the dark side just yet. She's saving it all up for later.
Don't go. We need to stick together.
No, I'm going to lure them away, and then I'm going to circle back.
Cal disarms Trilla and pulls her lightsaber to him, but it carries so many painful memories that he instinctively reads Trilla's tortured past, and it's so overwhelming that it drops him. While what we witness isn't enough to make us sympathise with Trilla, she's too broken by this point for us to sympathise with what's left, but it does make us empathise with the woman she once was, the Jedi she once was. But, okay, I hate critiques which just point out plot holes, but this one is kind of glaring, so I need to highlight it. Why does Trilla leave us alive? And with her lightsaber, of all things. First of all, surely she wants the lightsaber back? It's a symbol of her corruption, and she's so messed up by this point that I feel like the dark side of the Force surrounds her old weapon. It would be an object of power, right? The second is that while Cal is seizing up and witnessing her pain, she has an open opportunity as a villain to just walk up and break his neck. Why doesn't she? It's a pet peeve of mine, so I'm sorry if this isn't the sort of analysis you came here for, but it completely detracts from the impact of the scene when it's all over. Regardless, she escapes, and Cal returns to Cere with Trilla's weapon. With what he's envisioned, he completes his arc by owning up to his arrogance and sanctimony earlier in the game. He states as much himself, and it's always nice to have a flawed hero openly admit to their flaws. The two of them finally see eye to eye. The relationship of broken master and broken Padawan is repaired, and just to really hammer that home, Cere officially marks Cal as a Jedi Knight. He's a Padawan no more. If only Jaro Tapal was alive to see this moment. And if you'll allow me to properly nerd out here, she even uses the same line that Yoda used when he knighted Anakin in the Clone Wars TV show. Shut up, let me have this. Wait a second, I need to just mash this lipstick into my face. The team decide to infiltrate Fortress Inquisitorius, the Nightmare Tower buried deep beneath the ocean surface on Nur. We're heading into the belly of the beast for our final mission together, and it feels as epic and climactic as you could have possibly hoped for the conclusion to a Star Wars story. Cal and Cere go in together. Cere is clearly still terrified that she will be pulled to the dark side in the fortress. The memories of the torture she underwent are etched across her face. And speaking of performances, inside the capsule, we also get a close-up of Cal's face. The memory of the escape pod is still with him, a confined space being blasted out of a ship. It's enough to show that while he's ready to leave his guilt behind, he's still racked with the trauma of Order 66. So let's actually take this moment to talk about Cal's visual presentation while he hacks through the gauntlets of tough enemies on his way to Trilla. It's clear that despite the fact Cal has just been knighted as a Jedi, there are still two sides to his identity, the Jedi and the Scrapper, and this crisis of identity is portrayed through his costume design. Oh, and wait, actually, this is the perfect opportunity to talk about one of your comments on my Marvel's Avengers critique. User Danky Kang writes, Kamala's costume in the comics is amazing. It literally looks like a pair of pajamas. What are you smoking? First of all, Danky Kang, thanks for the engagement, pal. Second, Outer Wilds cured my smoking addiction, didn't you see the video? And third, it's not pajamas, it's a burkini. One of the few good scenes in that game explicitly points this out to us. It's a representation of how Kamala's heritage influences her heroism, and the pop-like aesthetic shows her youth and naivety, something she has to deal with in the comics. And hey, look at this knobend, swinging about in his pajamas. Look at this angry boy, his character design is literally just stretchy shorts and a skin condition. What about this wanker in a shitty vest? What a lazy visualization. Or better yet, what about this guy? Just a dickhead in a dressing gown. And finally, we have Cal Kestis, just a ginger in a raincoat. See? I can reduce interesting concepts too. On your quest, you can find new poncho designs for Cal to wear. Now, Cal's design has been criticised by some of my contemporaries, but I just don't get that. I think the poncho is kind of ingenious. It's his uniform from his days on Braca. He carries it with him as a memory of Prof's sacrifice and the hellish turn his life took after Order 66. During gameplay, it also looks a little bit like a cape, flapping about from behind him, a billowing cloak that reminds us of, well, the robes of the Jedi Order. Cal isn't a Jedi of the Republic, not anymore. He's a scrapper. He has a complicated relationship with the Force, and he relies on his scrapper wits to get by, as well as the Force. And the poncho serves us all up to the player on a silver platter. I really, really like this design. Speaking of Cal's relationship with the past, there's a moment in Fortress Inquisitorius where we need to open some shutters to let Cere through, and when we do, we watch in awe as she massacres a room full of stormtroopers. The way the shot is framed, with Cal behind glass, reminds us an awful lot of something. I can't remember what though. What was it? Oh yeah!
Get ready.
Side by side, these are two scenes which complement each other. Jaro Tapal cutting down the clones with his purple lightsaber and Cere slaying the stormtroopers links them both as mentors who have had a profound impact on Cal's understanding of the Force. Jaro Tapal taught him the foundations, and Cere taught him about the blurred lines. It makes me so excited about where Cal goes next on his journey. In Fallen Order 2, all I want from the story is that Aaron Contreras, the game's lead narrative designer, continues to explore Cal's relationship to the Force and not shy away from the philosophy of the Jedi and its inconsistencies in a post-Order world. It's something I wanted from the sequel trilogy and never got. Anyway, it's time to battle Trilla. We have fought Trilla a total of 3 times before this point, feeling our power and skills grow with each encounter, knocking her health bar down a little more, so when we finally enter this final boss, you'd be forgiven for feeling a little bit cocky about taking her down. Surging through the fortress is a power trip before this. We're beginning to really embrace the overpowered Jedi power of it all. But in an extremely meta way, the game punishes us for this arrogance with an extremely tough boss fight. Trilla has new, uninterruptible moves which we haven't seen before. She's faster, she hits harder, and the arena isn't a large round room like we saw in Bogano, but a strange curved rectangle. Just like with the Malicos fight, it can be emotionally stressful because you rarely get a moment to yourself. There are 2 phases, and for the most part, her moveset is fair and well telegraphed, but I'd be amiss if I didn't yank at one of her dick moves. See this attack? It's an absolute nightmare. It's too fast to dodge against, she'll often do it when you're right next to her so you can't see the ripple effect as it spreads out, and even if you are far enough away from her, the J.J. Abrams-esque neon lighting and strobe effects doesn't reflect properly off of the attacks, so sometimes you don't even see them charging towards you. Defeating Trilla, the game whacks us with yet another Star Wars moment. Darth Vader appears and swiftly kills her, and it's in these final moments with the obvious fear etched on Trilla that my sympathy became fully formed rather than just focused on the Padawan she once was. It's implied here that it was Vader himself who tortured and turned her. But other than this, there's absolutely no reason for Darth Vader to be here. Realising that you can't fight him and the possible threat of being reset to before Trilla's boss fight, it's pure, unbridled fan service, and I don't see a thematic or plot-relevant reason for it to exist. But it's also very good lipstick in the fact that this is a truly intimidating presentation of Darth friggin' Vader, fiction's most iconic villain. Yes he is, don't at me. Fallen Order doesn't even sniff at the possibility that Cal can hold his own against Vader. He's not some overpowered Jedi Grandmaster, he's just a guy struggling with his own understanding of the Force and has just survived a battle with an Inquisitor by the skin of his teeth. So the player is struck with immediate fear at seeing such a dark, ominous presentation of Vader. This is a Darth Vader just 5 years after he murdered a temple full of younglings. This is Darth Vader in his prime of brutality. This is the Darth Vader we saw at the end of Rogue One. This guy is going to destroy us. So yes, racing away from him with our heart in our throats is very good lipstick. And escaping from Fortress Inquisitorius demands everything from Cal and the team. Every crewmate of the Mantis contributes. Cal fights against Vader. Cere protects them both by embracing the light side of the Force, rejecting the dark side. BD-1 even zaps Vader in the neck and saves the day. Merrin saves Cal from the bottom of the ocean, and Grease swallows his fear and cowardice and swoops in to pick us up. By the time we come to the final scene, you're left with the feeling of watching an interesting, lovable cast of characters who have all undergone growth with varying degrees of success, complete their adventure, and the emotional response that a player is left with is the greatest Star Wars moment of them all.
The next generation of Jedi.
The Empire will be after him, just like they're after us.
Cal's growth is solidified in this moment. I love this ending. After spending the whole game trying to let down his walls and allow himself to reconnect with the Force, he finally does it. He embraces the Force vision he saw in the Zepho tomb, trusts in the message it tells him that using the holocron and restarting the Order now would be the wrong path to take. He gives himself over to the Force and lets it guide his hand, like a true Jedi would. He trusts in it. Fallen Order is as imperfect as you could possibly get with a game of this type. The platforming is a mess. The level design is forgetful and feels rushed. The combat doesn't give itself over to its inspirations enough. But I have not had a Star Wars story inspire me in such a way since, well, honestly, since Star Wars Rebels. I want more of the Mantis. I want more of Cal, of Merrin, Grease and Cere. When I heard that EA has lost its exclusivity of the property, I remember being momentarily worried and disappointed that we might not get another game in this style with these characters. Thankfully, those fears have been alleviated. Apparently Respawn have been working on Fallen Order 2 this whole time, but the very fact I was disappointed told me everything I needed to know about how I felt about this game. I want more. And if you want a lipstick idea for the sequel, Respawn, well, have Starkiller be the villain. Even if it's a clone or something, how cool would it be to have goddamn Starkiller hunting us, stalking us like prey? How treacherous would the world feel? I'm getting shivers just thinking about it. Fallen Order is a perfectly fine action-adventure game with the ultimate colour palette in the form of its neon reds, blues and greens. Perhaps lipstick on a pig was too narrow a phrase to use in this case. Maybe Cal's journey would be better described as a pig in a full face of makeup. Expensive makeup too, the sort of stuff Huda Katan would sell, but common and familiar all the same, like a beauty YouTuber involved in incessant drama. See, Montez? I could do the makeup thing. The reason why I like creating these critiques so much is because I get to spend so much time in a game's world. I played it through twice, I sucked up the interviews, the developer diaries, reviews, and often it drives me to watch relevant TV shows, movies, or comics which are connected to the property. Replaying Fallen Order, I got to give a damn about Star Wars again. Not even The Mandalorian gave me that. It's a story and a game which deserves a sequel, regardless of its flaws. And I know I won't be alone in welcoming the next chapter of what Respawn has planned. Search your feelings. You know it to be true. Thanks for watching. Just a quick shout out, the thumbnail for this video was designed by ZOLTIBOI. His channel's linked below and his editing style and smooth, dulcet tones make his video essays really soothing to watch. I highly recommend them. If you're curious about my Soulslike content, why not watch this breakdown of my girlfriend playing Dark Souls for the first time? Or, if you're in the mood for more story-based analysis, here's my Spider-Man Miles Morales critique. Like, comment and subscribe, and, as always, Take care.